to average.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News. This is Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil.
We have a great show lined up for you today. We're talking about the government's Rwanda asylum plans, the economic cost of lockdown and planned rail strikes.
All of that plus much more after your latest news with Bethany.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 10. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Asylum seekers who arrive in the UK via what the Home Office describes as unnecessary and dangerous routes could be electronically tagged under new government plans. A 12-month pilot scheme has been launched in England and Wales. It will target adults who are due to be removed from the UK. Those who fail to comply with their immigration bail conditions could be taken back to detention or even prosecuted. The Prime Minister has defended the plans, saying it's necessary to crack down on illegal immigration.
This is a very, very generous, welcoming country. Quite right too. I'm proud of it. And the government is composed of people, as you know, Tom, who trace their immediate lineage to people who've come in fear of their lives to this country. But when people come here illegally, when they break the law, it's important that we make that distinction. That's what we're doing with our Rwanda policy. That's what we're doing with making sure that asylum seekers can't just vanish into the rest of the country.
The Home Secretary has described the European Court decision to stop the first flight due to carry asylum seekers to Rwanda as absolutely scandalous and politically motivated. Speaking to the Daily Telegraph, Priti Patel said there's a lack of transparency in the way the court operated. Judges at the European Court of Human Rights granted a last-minute injunction that effectively grounded the chartered plane on the runway at Wiltshire. Next week's rail and tube strikes are to go ahead as talks between train operators, Network Rail and the unions failed to find a solution. Tens of thousands of rail workers are going on strike for 3 days next week in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Network Rail says it expects only a fifth of services to run. Well, tens of thousands of people are expected to protest in London today over the rising cost of living. Research by the TUC union shows workers have lost almost £20,000 since 2008 because pay hasn't kept up with inflation. General Secretary Francis O'Grady says it's gut-wrenching to hear how workers are struggling with rising bills. Well, the National Chair of Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition told GB News that urgent government action is needed.
We had a decade of austerity and most of our families lost about 10% over that decade. This year, we're on track to lose 10% in 1 year, 10 times as bad as what we've had in the last 10 years. So I think, regretfully, industrial action is necessary. I think more's coming, because it's not just the RMT workers next week. Communication workers union, the postal workers, as well as the telecoms are balloting. Even the doctors are talking about balloting.
Police in Brazil have confirmed the human remains found in the Amazon rainforest are those of missing British journalist Dom Phillips. A second body, believed to be that of Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira, is still under analysis. A local fisherman confessed to shooting the two men and has been charged with their murders. Police say there could be more individuals involved. A new service has been launched to help deaf people contact the emergency services. For the first time, people will be able to call 999 and use British Sign Language on a video call. Potential users must download an app or visit a website which will connect them with an interpreter who will relay the conversation to an emergency operator. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Saturday morning.
Good morning and welcome to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip on GB News. Coming up on the show today,
we're talking about the government's Rwanda asylum plans after a dramatic last-minute ruling by the European Court of Human Rights cancelled the inaugural flight on Tuesday night.
With only a fifth of train services due to run next week, passengers have been advised to travel only if it's necessary. We'll be discussing the implications of widespread industrial action on the public.
We're also talking about the effects of COVID lockdowns and whether they fuel the ongoing cost of living crisis in the UK.
And we want to hear from you this morning, so if you want to get involved in the show, please email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews. And remember, today is Paul McCartney's 80th birthday.
Who could forget?
You might want to tell us your favourite song or any memories that you've got of Paul McCartney.
Before all of that, though, we're joined in the studio by author and former Labour MP Simon Danchuk. So, Simon, what has caught your eyes in the paper this week?
Oh, undoubtedly the biggest story has to be the European Court of Human Rights stopping us sending illegal immigrants to Rwanda. I think that's the big story of the week, really. And it's a real dividing line in politics because you've quite clearly got a Conservative government determined to push this through, quite rightly, in my opinion, and then you've got the left who have no other solution to this problem and are effectively looking like they are on the side of illegal immigrants and people smugglers, and that's a real problem for Labour. The other issue that comes into it, I think, in terms of people on the left, is their views of Rwanda, and it's almost verging on being racist in terms of how they describe the country. I've been there before, I'll be there again in the next few weeks doing business. It's an absolutely beautiful country, so the idea that we're sending them somewhere awful or terrible is totally incorrect.
Do you think Labour and the opposition parties are in a mess over this? Because nobody seems to know what they think. They're sort of frightened to come out with a position on it. Some of them might be for, some of them might be against, but they're not really saying anything. And as you rightly say, they haven't got an alternative. We've got to do something.
We've got to do something, haven't we? These are illegal immigrants. They're being trafficked. People are making money out of the situation. Another person drowned yesterday in the crossing. And yet Labour are found wanting in terms of a solution, and that's a real problem for them. And it feels like we are slowly but surely edging towards a general election. And this will be one of the key issues. And I think the public are wholly behind the government in terms of using this as a potential solution. And the government has to be given the chance to test it. That's what we have to be able to do. And what the British don't like is being told from Europe what we can and what we can't do. So the situation's got worse for the opposition in relation to this issue.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to pick out a story from this week, which is it was a headline in the Times actually yesterday, which is "Pain ahead as Britain's braced for 11% inflation." Now, we all know about the cost of living crisis. That isn't the particularly thing that was newsworthy. It was the quote from Michael Gove which basically got my attention, because in it he said...
Did it get you going?
It did get me. It did get me going. It did get me going. And this could be a rant, Simon, by the way.
Keep going.
Yeah, if you don't mind. But he said in there, it is also the case that monetary policy we had in the wake of the 2008 financial crash and as a consequence of COVID has meant that a correction has to come, and that is painful. Now, the reason why this got me going is because Michael Gove was one of the big advocates of lockdowns within government. He was one of the hawks about this. And the thing that's really annoyed me about this is that he's basically saying that the consequence of those lockdowns was that a correction had to come that is painful. Now, the point is, did you ever hear Michael Gove or the government saying that at the time they were proposing the lockdowns? Did you ever hear them say, by the way, we're going to do these lockdowns, and we can tell you now that an inevitable consequence of this is that there's going to be a financial correction that's going to be painful? I can't remember anyone ever saying that. And this is the thing that really gets me going, that in effect, they should have given the public the full story at the time and said, look, we could have a lockdown, it might help with this, but the consequence is going to be really bad financially. You're going to have big inflation, higher interest rates, a cost of living crisis. Do you really want that? And it sort of really annoys me about politicians that they only tell you one half of the story. They only tell you the good bit. They never tell you the negative bit. And it always reminds me of Norman Tebbit, who once said that... you know, if you in an opinion poll, if you were to say to people, would you like a Rolls Royce? 99% of people would say yes. If you were to say to people, would you like a Rolls Royce? You're going to have to live in a tent for the rest of your life to pay for it. You might get a very different reaction. And it seems here that that's a prime example of what happened here. And, you know, politicians always promise painless panaceas that don't exist. And here we had the government advocating lockdowns but not telling the public what the consequence would be, and now saying afterwards that this consequence was inevitable. And that's why it's got my juices flowing when I read the paper
And
yesterday.
rightly so, and I will actually say worse than that. There was a handful of us, as you can imagine, in the opposition, opposing the continual lockdown, not the first one, the continual one, because we said you have not taken other things into consideration, poverty, health, children, etc., etc., and we were more or less ridiculed as extremists. And now they're saying they knew it, we could have done it, we should have let you know, and that is what got me going. I'm surprised that didn't get you going as well, Phil.
They could have had a more nuanced approach to the pandemic, couldn't they? That's what I always think. So help protecting more vulnerable people, but allowing more freedoms for other people. And that wouldn't have just created more freedoms, it would have helped the economy, stabilise the economy, and we are, as you point out, paying the consequences of this quite literally.
I just want more honest we're actually say up front we're speaking to Professor David Payton later from Nottingham University about the impact of lockdowns on the cost of living. But anyway,
and he's got all academic studies, so that would be really good for that. This will get you going as well. Right. I saw this. It was video footage actually online of how some Italian motorists had dealt with Extinction Rebellion protesters. There was no messing around there. There they were, causing chaos, causing carnage on the roads, and these people just dragged them off the roads. I mean, it is the minority, a couple of people there, ruining it for the majority. It was the public, as I saw it, standing up for themselves. No nonsense, common sense approach. And those people can't think you can cause all that mayhem and be untouchable. So I was delighted to see that approach taken there. And I just wished in the UK we could have taken a little bit more of that approach and felt we could.
Are you a softly approach man for this, or are you with the Italians?
I'd be doing an Italian job in this instance, that's clearly what. We're far too passive and polite in Britain at times, aren't we?
But is it because we all like queuing, so we all queued in our cars for hours and hours?
Yeah, and we would complain about it quite rarely, you know, for hours on end. But yeah, we should take a leaf out of the Italian.
Maybe the British police ought to take a leaf out of the Italian.
Well, the other part
because
of
they
that story,
about
yeah.
it.
Well, the other part.
Look at them sometimes.
The police turned up eventually and took the protesters into custody. That probably wouldn't have happened in the UK.
Yeah. Anything else that caught your eye?
Well, the other story for me this week, quite light-hearted, and it broke on Twitter. So we had a press agency journalist. He spotted, he was reporting on the terrible situation in Ukraine, but he spotted a Hampshire wheelie bin, council wheelie bin, 1,200 miles away from where it should be, which I thought was quite funny.
Was the wind that bad?
Yeah, exactly.
Blew it all the way there.
Yeah. And there's always an argument about whether the bin men return it to your drive or to your back gate. Well, I mean, it clearly didn't happen in this instance. You know, it probably had the wrong refuse in it, so it never got taken back.
When I worked for Asda, it was always a question of where our trolleys ended up. But I'm not sure one ever made it to Ukraine, mine, but not far away, to be perfectly honest.
He might now get a new bin. Whoever lost that bin, you know, so I don't know where it is. It's gone somewhere. No, they can now probably get a new bin for
free. They have to pay for it. I bet they charge them.
And we've probably had our summer this week. This is it. The weather has been wonderful. And I just thought it was great to see people out and about in crowds, enjoying themselves. Yes, you've seen everybody at Ascot, all of the outfits, all of the hats, but you've seen people on the beaches, you've seen people in the parks. I'm sounding like Winston Churchill here. No, seen them on the beaches, seen them on the parks, all having a good time.
Yeah.
Do you like the heat?
Yes, I do. I celebrate it like everybody else, you know, but you have to work, you have to carry on working, don't you, in these conditions? That's the downside.
I can't stand it. Lancashire must have better weather than Yorkshire, because I'm not used to this hot weather. It's terrible. Anyway, Simon, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
See you at 11.
We will indeed. Now, Home Secretary Priti Patel has told MPs that the government remains committed to sending asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda.
It comes after an intervention from the European Court of Human Rights, which led to the first flight being cancelled minutes before take-off this week.
The Rwanda asylum plan, which was announced in April, intends to take some asylum seekers who arrive in the UK on a one-way ticket to Rwanda to claim asylum there instead.
To discuss the story further, we're delighted to be joined by the Bishop of Buckingham, the Right Reverend Dr. Alan Wilson. So, Bishop, you were one of all of the bishops who wrote a letter to the Times saying this was shameful. Why did you write that letter?
Because we believe it's shameful. It's shameful in all sorts of ways. It's morally shameful. It's legally shameful. It's probably a waste of time and highly ineffective, and it's incredibly expensive. But it's the moral and legal problem, really, that I think was the biggest motivation for the letter that went in.
Well, you say there's a legal problem. Obviously, every court in the UK, up to and including the Supreme Court, actually said that it was legal and that the flight could take off. So do you know more about the legalities than the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom?
Yeah, the basis legally in UK law is Somerset's case of 1772, where the Lord Chief Justice laid down, this is Lord Mansfield, that every human being in Britain is in a free country. And when the slave's foot touched British soil, he was entitled to due process. That's not the Europeans, it's nothing like that. 1772, it's one of the cornerstones of the fabulous freedoms that we have in Britain.
Well, you obviously don't agree with the Supreme Court, but I wondered what your problem was with France, because these people are not fleeing persecution in a far-flung place. These people are fleeing France. So why, if these people are genuine refugees, what's the problem with these people claiming for asylum and refuge in France?
Well, the biggest group of people crossing the Channel right now are from Afghanistan, and they're very often people who put their lives on the line for Britain during our campaign to help support our service personnel in Afghanistan. They speak English. They've fondly imagined that Britain would be interested in helping them when their own repressive regime came after them to kill them. And it's not to do. They don't speak French. They didn't put their lives on the line for the French government. It was the British government, the British Armed Services. And I think we deserve proper humanitarian treatment for them. And as I say, as a cornerstone of British law, they deserve due process. That's what we do. It's part of our British freedom. And it's been so for 250 years. And it's really important to respect that. It's one of the things that makes Britain such a great place to be, that we have these freedoms underscored not by the tabloid press, anything like that, underscored by hundreds of years of tradition that secure our freedom, and the freedom of anybody to be considered as a full human being and given the benefit of due process on our soil is absolutely fundamental. to our laws.
And so, what's the Church of England's solution to illegal immigration coming into the country? Do you take the view that anybody who wants to come here should be able to come here? Do you think that every refugee around the world should be able to pitch their tent in the UK if they want to? Do you think there should be no restrictions at all on who comes into the UK?
No, I don't think any of those things. They're ludicrous, ludicrous ideas, and I don't have any ludicrous. You need safe and secure and properly administered ways into this country, which are subject to all the proper moral and legal and ethical boundaries that are part of the wonderful tradition of Britain. My mother came to this country as a refugee from Hitler because it was different. Because this country was a fabulous place to be, because it had the rule of law and because it was a free country in a way that her own country wasn't. And we need to maintain that tradition. It's a very proud part of being British.
Now, I can see, what you're saying and how we've always been a fair country, and we have. And we're still taking in tens of thousands of refugees and immigrants who are going via illegal passage. But I'm wondering what the church could do. You're obviously very vocal. You're wanting to support these people. So I was looking online about how much land the church owns, which is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of acres, how much money the church has. And I wondered, what are you doing as a group, rather than just opposing what the voting public have said, opposing what the democratically elected government have said? What's the church going to do to put its hand in its pocket and use its land to support these refugees, if you feel so strongly about it?
Many church projects do, in fact, support refugees, and I'm welcoming 4 refugees from Ukraine into my home next Tuesday.
So that's...
And all over the country, there are people at Lambeth Palace. Exactly what you suggest should be happening is exactly what is happening.
So that's 4 refugees, and we've got, obviously, lots of families and friends doing the same thing.
There are all sorts of...
We get that.
If you go to any refugee charity, you will find that Christians, not just Anglican Christians, are absolutely in the front row of decent humanitarian provision when people arrive in this country, along with other people of all faiths and none. But no, the churches are absolutely, and if you go to Dover, you will find exactly that. It is the churches and the Christian communities, not just Anglican, but are absolutely in the front row of a proper British humanitarian response to this problem.
And I fully appreciate that, but I was looking at, you're seeing, congregations falling, a decline of 15% since 1998. So I was looking at how does the church sort of become more active? And I'm looking at now, the church owns 120,000 acres of rural land alone. It's got money in endowments of over £8 billion. So I'm just saying, what are you going to do on your land, not in your home, but what could the church do to be as active as it is writing letters to the Times and opposing the government and the public opinion?
Oh, it is very active. I mean, one of the most interesting projects I saw a couple of years ago was about the regeneration of a Gloucestershire village through the fact the church owned land there and could bring together community groups to help ease the housing problem that people have over social housing in rural Gloucestershire. There are projects all over the country that the church is involved in, which are consistent with our general purposes. And that is, the ethical use of land, the use of creative projects, all of that does go on in all sorts of different ways in communities all over England.
What would you say to our viewers, many of which might be watching the TV at the moment and say, here we go, here's a out-of-touch, privileged, privately educated, Oxbridge-educated person, completely, remotely out of touch with what working-class communities think. What would you say to those people?
Well, we are all entitled in this country to have a view. Part of being British, we don't live in a place where you have a sort of lynch mob if you're the wrong sort of person. But actually, if I may say so, one aspect of my life in the church over many years is that you get to see all sorts of people. When I worked, for example, in a prison, I worked with lots of people who weren't privileged, Oxbridge-educated, private schoolboys or anything like that. We have all sorts of community links with all kinds of different people. And that's really a very important part of ministry in the church. We cover the whole country. Very often, the vicar is the only person from a sort of profession like that who is living in some inner city areas. All the others live outside and commute in. Because of the parish system, we have all kinds of relationships and communities that we build up all over Britain. And that doesn't make for a very narrow outlook. Obviously, you meet all sorts of people in all sorts of ways and take them immensely seriously. I mean, the 4 young men I was with the other day in a high-security prison getting confirmed, they're not Oxbridge-educated at all. They have an extraordinary story of renewal and lives being turned round, and the church is right at the middle of that, of course. And they are equal with me or anybody else within the church, because it's a place of equality, of security and of truth. So we don't do this kind of sneering at people because they're people we don't like. That's just babyish.
Dr. Alan Wilson, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning and putting your point across. Thank you very much indeed.
They always said that the Church of England... They always said the Church of England was the Conservative Party at prayer. I sometimes think it's become the Labour Party leading the prayers. Whether it's the Conservative Party still at prayer, I don't know. But we'd love to hear people's views about that. Coming up after the break, we're also talking about rail strikes due to impact the UK this week, as well as Scottish independence.
And we want to hear from you, as Philip said. So get involved in the conversation, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. See you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Grant Shapps has said that upcoming train strikes will drive passengers away and threaten rail workers' jobs.
The Transport Secretary urged unions to call off planned strikes, saying the walkouts would cause misery, adding they were designed to inflict damage at the worst possible time.
Well, joining us now to discuss the proposed strikes is former chairman of the Rail Freight Group, that's Lord Tony Barclay. So, Tony, if I may, this is going to be chaos and carnage for the public next week. Will any of those unions have any sympathy from the public for the action they're taking?
Well, Esther, it's obvious that the public won't like the strikes. None of us like strikes, but we need to go back a step, because it's easy for the Secretary of State to blame the unions, but on the other hand, the government is controlling everything that the railways do at the moment since the COVID, although they lost much of their revenue, obviously. And the government is micromanaging the train operators to the extent that they say that they cannot negotiate with the unions without every I being dotted and every T crossed for what they want to do. I'm sure if they were allowed to negotiate within rules set by the Treasury, that this could have been avoided, and I hope it still can be.
Have to get round the table, but I'm looking at the support that the government has given. They gave, what, £16 billion during lockdown. The railway workers were on 100% of the wage, not like many staff who were furloughed on 80%, or some people who got no money whatsoever. So people will be thinking, why on earth are you going on strike when you have been supported so well during the lockdown period?
Well, I think that's a fair comment, and a lot of people will be saying that. On the other hand, with the recovery on the rail passengers, it's different to what it was before. There's much less commuting returning and much more leisure traffic, which probably means a lower revenue, and there'll need to be more flexibility within the workforce, and probably a reduction eventually, which could happen with natural wastage. But all these things could actually be done by sitting around a table with the Secretary of State and the trade unions, and of course the train operators themselves, and say, can't we work this out? And that I don't think that's happened, and it's ridiculous that this is going to give us 3 days of strikes this year, this week, and maybe more in the future. And we've got to sort this out. But the government honestly has to give something as well as the trade unions.
Tony, is there any evidence that the unions are prepared to compromise on anything? I mean, you've just said that the revenues for the train operators are down, the customer numbers are down. In any other walk of life, any other business would say, well, look, with that backdrop, we've got to cut our costs, we've got to deal with outdated, inefficient working practices. Is there any evidence at all that the unions are prepared to face up to that reality and accept job losses and cutting of costs and compromising on those working practices?
Well, I don't work for the trade unions, so I can't answer that question. But as you say, in any business where there's change taking place, and change is taking place, then everybody has to compromise. But I don't believe it's been put to them in a way that they could even consider at the moment. It's just been saying you shouldn't go on strike. And I think what needs to be done is a plan for the future. Maybe it's part of the Great British Railways restructuring that the government is doing. The trade unions need to be involved in this. There needs to be changes to working practices. There may be redundancies, but more likely it'll come with natural wastage. But other than that, if the government will start cutting services in a quite dramatic way in order to save costs, and we don't want that, obviously.
What would you say about the idea of passing legislation to ban railway workers from going on strike because of the importance of the strategic importance of the railways, and perhaps in return for maybe a national pay review body, and the government agrees to accept their recommendations every year? Would that be a way out of this impasse?
Well, it's certainly a way out, but I'm not sure it should be confined to the railway sector. I mean, there may be similar things in the air sector and the road transport sector, and even the ferries, as we've seen recently with P&O. Going as far as P&O did in suddenly sacking all their workers has had a massive dramatic effect on people's business across the channel, and it may well be that we've got to look at something like this you suggest again. But at the moment, I think the key thing is to get round the table urgently and try and see what the problems are that can be resolved and which ones can't be resolved, because otherwise the government's just going to say, right, we'll cut all the branch line services, or we'll cut the frequency of services between London and Manchester or something, and that's going to affect an awful lot of people as well.
I'll need a brief answer to this, but do you think that this rail strike is going to be a nail in the coffin for HS2? Why do we need an extra rail line when most people now aren't back on the railways, and most people, as the services close down, are going to turn more to being online, not on a train line, but on broadband?
Well, I find it extraordinary that the government is spending what's likely to be near £150 billion on HS2, while it's not actually improving the local services in the North and the Midlands, which are really so awful at the moment. And I'm not suggesting that cancelling HS2 would allow them to pay the rail workers more money just like that. But there needs to be some overall management of the railways. At the moment, HS2 gets all the money it wants, whereas the rest of the railways is actually being starved of investment. And that needs to be changed, and somebody needs to come to a decision. And we'll see on Monday, when there's a second reading of the HS2 bill for the section between Crewe and Manchester, what parliamentarians think about it, and whether they think it's now time to call a halt. Because, Esther, we must remember that there is no design for Euston Station that can work yet, and there's no budget for Old Oak Common Station on the Great Western. So it's fine having a railway, but you've got to have a station at each end, and it's about time that they sorted that out, and the cost of it too.
Always talk common sense, Tony. Thank you very much indeed for being on the show this morning. Thank you, Lord Tony Barclay.
Thank you.
Now, this week, Nicola Sturgeon unveiled what she called a refreshed case for Scottish independence.
During a press conference in Edinburgh, Scotland's First Minister said her government had an indisputable mandate for a second independence referendum as she launched the first of a series of papers setting out the case to break away from the UK.
Opposition parties have accused the Scottish Government of being obsessed with independence.
It is.
And Boris Johnson has said the 2014 referendum result should be respected.
Well, joining us now to discuss this further is former SNP councillor Austin Sheridan. So is this just political pantomime? Things get tough in Scotland, so the first thing you do is go back to that bandwagon of independence rather than getting on with really key domestic issues.
Good morning. No, what this is respecting the democratic mandate that the people of Scotland gave the Scottish Parliament. At the most recent parliamentary elections last year, people elected 72 pro-independence MSPs who supported a second referendum and 57 unionist MSPs who opposed the referendum. The people of Scotland had their say. They've elected the largest pro-independence majority parliament since it was established in 1999, so it's only fair that we carry out the wishes of the Scottish people and stick to the manifesto commitment, which is to hold a referendum on Scotland's future.
In the 2014 referendum, ahead of that, the Scottish Government stated in its white paper that voting yes was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to follow a different path and choose a new and better direction for our nation. And during that referendum, both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So what's changed? Is this just a question of keep voting until you get the answer that you want?
I mean, generally it would be a once-in-a-lifetime, or a generational vote. However, what we do know is there's been massive changes in the United Kingdom since the vote in 2014. For example, a key point of the No campaign was that Scotland's place in Europe was best protected by voting no. We know that that isn't the case. We've been dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people. 62% of Scotland voted Remain. And also, when you look at the state of the UK in itself, I think that if we knew back in 2014, hindsight is a wonderful thing, that Boris Johnson was going to be Prime Minister, that we were going to be dragged out of the EU against our will. I believe back in 2014, if we knew what we know now, Scotland would have voted yes then. But the most fundamental point is that the people of Scotland have gave a refreshed mandate for a second referendum, and that was put forward in 2021. The people of Scotland knew what they were voting for, because the unionist parties were never done saying if you re-elect an SNP government, it means a second referendum. And the people of Scotland re-elected an SNP government and a pro-independence majority parliament.
Austin, look, I understand the argument for independence and people wanting to be independent. What I don't understand, and perhaps you can explain this to me, is why you want to take all the powers away from Westminster and then pass them all over to Brussels rather than relocate them in Edinburgh. I think that's the bit that some of us find difficult to grasp. It's not independence. You just, instead of having powers residing in Westminster, you want them to be residing in Brussels instead.
No, that's not the way the European Union works, because if one member state in the European Union doesn't agree, then it can't go ahead. I mean, because it is a union of equals, whereas in the United Kingdom, clearly that is not the case. I mean, even if we look at an issue within the UK just now, if you look at Northern Ireland, for example, where they have the protocol in place, which gives their economy access to the European single market effectively, they're the best performing part of the United Kingdom when it comes to their economy. So that is what we're at. Well, we argued for that kind of special dispensation in Scotland as well. Westminster refused to consider it. So we actually pursued a number of options based along what the people of Scotland voted for in the EU referendum, and it's fell in deaf ears. It's clearly time for Scotland to chart our own path.
Now, how do you view the economic situation if you did come away from England? Because people talk about it as a massive and permanent economic disruption. And if you want to go into the EU, you'd have to get your deficit and your debt down to actually go there. And people are saying this is going to be worse. And the austerity that you would have to take on board will be worse than what happened in Greece, in Ireland, in Iceland. So are you coming clean with your voters that actually you are taking them on a path to poverty?
Well, you know something, there would always be challenges when we're setting up in the initial stages of an independent Scotland. And Nicola Sturgeon, and I don't think anyone has shied away from that. But what we do know, what we're guaranteed as being part of the UK is facing 11% inflation that the Bank of England has announced. What we face is the slowest growing economy in Europe, bar Russia, which is under sanctions. And what we've already faced is a hike in tax and national insurance and that's hitting the pockets of low-paid workers the most. At the end of the day, we know what's guaranteed with the remaining part of the UK, and that is hardship. That is a growing number of people having to use food banks, and people having to choose between heating and eating. Scotland, with the economic levers, can forge a different path. And if you look at the document that was published, Why Not Scotland, there are comparator countries in there, all with different complexions of government, from left-wing governments to governments that actually lean more to the right. And what they all have in common is to have better business investment, and their economy is recovering faster. So why not Scotland?
Austin Sheridan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure, thank you.
Coming up on the show, we're talking about the cost of COVID lockdowns and the impact they continue to have on the economy.
And we want to hear from you today, so if you want to get involved in the conversation, you know what to do. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. See you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick.
Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. We've got some of your views here. They're all coming in thick and fast.
Alan says, I disagree with Phil that people didn't know...
I often do, Alan. Don't you worry.
Alan, you're certainly not alone. I disagree with Phil that people didn't know there would be a price to pay for lockdown. People are not stupid and know the cost has to be paid for.
Yeah, I think we were saying people knew the cost. It was politicians who didn't. Now, I've got Neil. Neil says, I'm currently watching your programme and was taken aback but heartened by your comment regarding Michael Gove's remark on inflation. We need honest politicians. It's very disappointing that 59% of your colleagues don't think the same way and voted to keep the most dishonest politician and brazen with it in power against the overwhelming wishes of the electorate. I see the Northern MPs, many Redwall, were rewarded by Mr Johnson's failure to attend a meeting yesterday in Doncaster. I hope that snob is not rewarded.
And Caroline says, please pass on my congratulations to Esther and Philip for their interview with the church today. Thank you very much, Caroline. That's very kind. The interview was professional yet forensic at challenging the church to put their hand in their pockets to use their land and finances to solve the illegal migration issues rather than just criticise. Absolutely excellent.
Thank you, Caroline.
Now, today, Sir Paul McCartney turns 80 years old.
Or should we say 80 years young, as he thinks he is. The legendary Beatles member has had a career spanning 6 decades and has written what are regarded by some as the greatest songs of all time.
Well, join us now to talk about Paul's enduring legacy and the impact he has had on millions of lives around the globe is author of Fab, An Intimate Life of Paul McCartney, Howard Soons. Howard, thank you for joining us. I think you've updated your book, haven't you, refreshed it for the 80th birthday celebrations.
Brought it up to date, yeah.
What do you think Paul McCartney's legacy is?
Well, he's probably the greatest cultural figure in Britain today, along with David Hockney and people like that. He's probably the most successful rock star in the world. And he's the living embodiment of our favourite pop band ever, the Beatles. When you see Paul live, he plays the Beatles songs, and it just gives you the greatest feeling because it's happy memories for people all over the world.
But to 80 and to keep performing and keep doing new things. In one of the papers today, because obviously lots of the papers are talking about him, this is the Mail, page 30 and 31, this says he's got an inexhaustible need to achieve. Now, when you wrote your book, you did, lots of research for 2 years, interviewed lots of people. Did you come across this inexhaustible need to achieve?
Yes, I mean, certainly he's obviously a very driven, ambitious, clever man who's, wants to succeed, wants to be top of the pops all the time, even at 80. But you have to remember that it's also fun. As one of his friends told me last week, imagine getting up on stage at 80 and there's 60,000 people clapping and screaming your name and they love you. I mean, who's not going to do that?
And this week they were singing Happy Birthday to him as well.
Yeah.
With John Bon Jovi, Bruce Springsteen and 50,000 people singing Happy Birthday. Yeah. What's not to like? What do you think he'll be doing on his birthday?
Well, he's coming home. He lives in Sussex primarily on this vast estate. I mean, he's incredibly wealthy. His estate in Sussex is 3 times as big as Hyde Park. Gives you an idea of how rich he is. He's 3 times richer than Mick Jagger. But next Saturday, he headlines Glastonbury. He's on the telly. And it's the second time he's headlined Glastonbury, which is a testament to his undimmed star power. You know, state retirement age is, I think, now 67. At 80, you can headline Glastonbury.
Yeah, fantastic. And he's going to do a song with John Lennon. They're going to do it so that John Lennon comes up on a screen. And I think this is interesting. I was curious on what did you think their relationship was like? They both suffered sort of the loss of their mum when they were young. Did this draw them together? What do you think their friendship was all about?
I think it's like friendships that we all have in our youth. You know, very intense. Your best pal, your best mate. And your best mate in the sense of Lennon and McCartney, like Jagger and Richards, turns out to be your business partner and your writing partner. So you evolve from teenagers just hanging out together to being in business together. And that's a difficult transition, I think. And obviously, there were some niggles over that. And still to this day, you know, he's still very touchy, Sir Paul, about who broke up the Beatles.
And whose name comes first on the songs.
Yeah, very, you know, because, you know, all this stuff that happened when he was 20 years old, you know, like a kid in Liverpool, you know, it's been his whole life. You know, he's never been able to get away from it. But, I mean, I'm sure they loved each other, and, you know, it's a songwriting partnership, the equal of all the great, you know, songwriting partnerships in history. You know, I mean, there's really, apart from Bob Dylan, there's nobody in the pop era really quite to equal them.
And how important was Linda McCartney in Paul's success?
Well, I mean, it's a very happy marriage. I mean, I think, you know, a happy marriage is the basis of a successful career in many respects.
Don't ever forget that.
Yeah. And, you know, she kind of changed him in a way. I mean, she came from a wealthy background. He came from a sort of working class background. She was a vegetarian. He became a vegetarian. She was American. He spends much of his life in America. To this day, he owns lots of property in America.
And her father was a big influence on Paul McCartney. He said, I learnt a lot with them. He crammed in a lot of information on that. So he viewed them as sort of mentors or something.
Well, yeah, Lee Eastman, Linda's dad, is a big-time US corporate lawyer, became Paul's lawyer.
Is he tight? Everybody says Paul McCartney is tight, is he?
I think he is tight, but having said that, he did give Heather Mills 16.5 million quid, so...
that was less than she was hoping for, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was less than she was hoping for, but since then, you know, he's twice as rich now than he was when he divorced Heather. I mean, the Sunday Times had him as over £800 million, which is by far the richest person in the British music business last weekend.
Howard Soons, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We appreciate it, and we very much hope that this 80th birthday leads to a surge in sales for your book. So,
well, thank you.
So Fab, An Intimate Life of Paul McCartney. I hope people go and buy it.
Do you know, I went to see him at the King's Dock in Liverpool. I think it was 2003, so he would have been like 60 odd or something then. And I thought that was his last tour.
Yeah, a mere 60, yeah.
And, you know, at the time I thought, well, I wonder how many songs I know. 3 hours, however long he performed.
Yeah.
Everybody could chant the words back to him, all these songs. You forget just how much he's written. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Now, something completely different. Experts have told MPs and peers that the ongoing cost of living is a direct result of imposing ruinous lockdowns on society.
Professor David Payton said that many of our current problems could have been avoided had the government carried out an effective cost-benefit analysis of lockdowns and other restrictions.
Well, we're delighted to say that Professor Payton joins us now. Hello, David. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that, about your research and where this cost of living really stems from?
Yeah, sure. We're getting increasing evidence of the so-called benefits of lockdown and other restrictions. And one of the big frustrations for me as an economist is that the government didn't really investigate whether these things were working, but also what the costs were. And you know, in any sort of policy decision, you need to work out the costs and benefits. And most of the recent evidence now is suggesting that lockdowns probably had little or no impact even on COVID deaths. And most people assume, well, of course, lockdowns worked. Actually, the evidence, you look across the world, so a recent paper suggested perhaps on average there was about a 3% decrease in mortality. Other work from Oxford University suggested there was no impact at all. Yet at the same time, we know that the government spent a huge amount of money telling businesses they couldn't open and paying people not to work. The government estimates about £150 billion was spent in business support. That's not in test and trace or in supporting the NHS. That's in paying businesses not to open and people not to work. That money probably had little or no benefit. Yet, of course, what it did do, it meant that when we opened up, people had a little bit more money to spend. You had supply chain restrictions. So it's not a surprise that we then saw very, very big inflation. And this started long before the Ukraine war, which may have been another factor. But really the driving force is what the government did in lockdown. So we're sort of reaping the consequences now of the decisions that were taken a couple of years ago, which really could have been avoided if the government had taken a harder look at the costs and benefits of what they were doing.
David, just on that, if we'd have not locked down in the UK, but obviously most countries around the world did have some form of lockdowns, would we have avoided these cost of living pressures, or would we still have suffered from them anyway? Because obviously the supply chain issues were impacted by decisions made by governments around the world. The surge in demand would have still happened with other countries around the world when they opened up. So would we have actually avoided this cost of living crisis, or would we have still had it anyway, even if we hadn't locked down?
I don't think it's either or. I think clearly there would still have been problems. And of course, some of the economic hit was because of the COVID pandemic itself. It was real. Lots of people were seriously ill, and we had to take it seriously. And businesses would have been hit by that on its own. As we know from the experience of countries like Sweden, which took a slightly different path, didn't have lockdowns, relied much more on voluntary restrictions, and the same in a country like Japan as well, didn't have worse outcomes in terms of mortality, but didn't see such a bad impact on the economy and Japan now on inflation. So I think there's some truth. Yes, the government would still have had to spend some money, but certainly not as much, certainly not that £150 billion. And let's remember that's the equivalent of about the whole NHS budget for a year, spent not talking about spending on the NHS, but simply telling people not to work and businesses to shut down. Now, certainly the vast majority of that money would not have to have been spent without the lockdowns and restrictions. And even though we would have still had some problems, as you say, from the international situation, what it would have done is given the government more scope, because having spent all that money, now the government has very limited spending ability to help people out in difficult situations. So they're looking to increase taxes, whereas in a situation like we're facing now, we'd really want the government to cut taxes, to cut energy bills, to help out with that cost of living crisis. But we're finding the government's hands are tied because of the decisions they took.
When you talk about the cost-benefit analysis, I mean, this isn't you talking with hindsight. Lots of people said at the time, you can't just look at one bit of the whole jigsaw puzzle. Politicians are there to look at the health issues, look at the pandemic, but then look at everything else, education and money. And also there was a study by Bristol University earlier on. But what cost-benefit analysis would you have done or wanted them to have done back in 2020?
It's exactly that, looking at the costs, and these weren't a surprise. Of course, you can never know with certainty, but you can certainly know that shutting down schools, for example, will lead to huge costs in terms of education gap. And of course, we know that's going to hit people from poorer backgrounds more than people from richer backgrounds, and that was certainly the case, and there's lots of evidence now. So I think at the time, it was taking a hard-nosed look and saying, OK, we've got this mathematical modelling from SAGE looking at the health, and we now know that those models were vastly inflated in terms of the number of deaths that they expected lockdowns to save. In fact, we know that infections were dropping before the lockdowns even started. It probably in all three cases of the English lockdown. But irrespective of what you thought of the benefits of lockdown, it was taking into account in your decisions the long-term consequences of following through with those lockdown policies. And it's the £150 billion they spent in support. Well, we knew they would be spending, something like that sort of money. It was the school closures, it was the operations that didn't happen because people were told to stay home. It was the businesses that didn't get business support and still suffered and had to shut down. It was a lot of people's ordinary everyday activities, meeting up with friends for a cup of tea. That's hard to measure in monetary terms, but it's a genuine cost the kids' parties that were missed. And I think if the government were taking a rounder view and looking back in history and how we've dealt with pandemics, and the World Health Organization established ways for dealing with pandemics, which they sort of threw out of the window when we went for a lockdown, then at the time, we can understand governments wanting to do something and worrying about how people are, because people, of course, were suffering and people were dying from COVID. But it's government's responsibility to take the long-term view and to say, well, okay, what are the consequences of doing what we're planning to do?
Professor David Payton, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. And that was, like you said this morning, the paper, what Michael Gove said, that there would have to be this massive sort of readjustment, things nobody talked about in advance. And Professor Payton there saying so clearly, the cost of lockdown, the inflationary pressures, and now you haven't got the money to save us from lockdown. So, coming up in the next hour of the show, we'll be talking about veganism and artificial intelligence.
And we want to hear more from you today, so get involved. Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at GBNews. See you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning and welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip.
Coming up on this hour of the show, we'll be discussing the study which found that people with strong Northern English accents are viewed as less intelligent than their Southern counterparts.
We will also be joined by the author of a book which looks into whether a plant-based diet really is good for your health, or if that idea is entirely false.
All that plus much more after your latest news with Bethany.
Good morning. It's just gone 11 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Asylum seekers who arrive in the UK via what the Home Office describe as unnecessary and dangerous routes could be electronically tagged under new government plans. A 12-month pilot scheme has been launched in England and Wales. It will target adults who are due to be removed from the UK. Those who fail to comply with their immigration bail conditions could be taken back to detention or even prosecuted. The Prime Minister defended the plans, saying it's necessary to crack down on illegal immigration.
This is a very, very generous, welcoming country. Quite right too. I'm proud of it. The government is composed of people, as you know, Tom, who trace their immediate lineage to people who've come in fear of their lives to this country. But when people come here illegally, when they break the law, it's important that we make that distinction. That's what we're doing with our Rwanda policy. That's what we're doing with making sure that asylum seekers can't just vanish into the rest of the country.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says it won't work and that the government is chasing headlines.
I don't want to see anybody making that dangerous journey across the channel. And I absolutely want to see us clamp down and end the trafficking, these criminal gangs that are running this. That requires a grown-up, serious response, working with the French authorities and cracking down on the gangs upstream. I don't think the government's plans are going to achieve that.
The Home Secretary has described the European Court decision to stop the first flight due to carry asylum seekers to Rwanda as absolutely scandalous and politically motivated. Speaking to the Daily Telegraph, Priti Patel said there's a lack of transparency in the way the court operated. Judges at the European Court of Human Rights granted a last-minute injunction that effectively grounded the chartered plane on the runway at Wiltshire. Next week's rail and tube strikes are to go ahead as talks between train operators and Network Rail and the unions failed to find a solution. Tens of thousands of rail workers are going to strike for 3 days next week in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Network Rail says it expects only a fifth of services to run. And tens of thousands of people are also expected to protest in London today over the rising cost of living. Research by the TUC union shows workers have lost almost £20,000 since 2008 because pay hasn't kept up with inflation. General Secretary Francis O'Grady says it's gut-wrenching to hear how workers are struggling with rising bills. National Chair of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition told GB News he's calling for urgent government action.
We had a decade of austerity and most of our families lost about 10% over that decade. This year, we're on track to lose 10% in 1 year, 10 times as bad as what we've had in the last 10 years. So I think, regretfully, industrial action is necessary. I think more's coming, because it's not just the RMT workers next week. Communication workers union, the postal workers, as well as the telecoms are balloting. Even the doctors are talking about balloting.
Police in Brazil have confirmed the human remains found in the Amazon rainforest are those of missing British journalist Dom Phillips. A second body, believed to be that of Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira, is still under analysis. A local fisherman confessed to shooting the two men and has been charged with their murders. Police say there could still be more individuals involved. A new service has been launched to help deaf people contact the emergency services. For the first time, people will be able to call 999 and use British Sign Language. Potential users must download an app or visit a website which will connect them with an interpreter who will relay the conversation to an emergency operator. And Boris Johnson says he hopes Ukraine can host the Eurovision Song Contest next year. After returning from a surprise trip to Kiev, the Prime Minister said that Ukraine deserved to hold the event as it won this year's competition. The BBC is reportedly in talks with the European Broadcasting Union about hosting the event next year in the UK due to the conflict in Ukraine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's get back to Esther and Philip.
Good morning and welcome back to Saturday Morning with me, Esther, and Philip there. Coming up this hour.
We're looking at so-called accentism after a study found that people with strong Northern English accents, us too, are considered less intelligent than their Southern counterparts.
How very dare they. And we're joined by the author of a book which looks into whether a plant-based diet really is beneficial for our health.
We'll also be joined by our regular sports and showbiz reporters to look at the biggest stories from the week.
And loads of you have been getting in touch already, but we want more. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, then email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
But before all of that, we're joined again in the studio by author and former Labour MP Simon Danczuk. Simon, What's tickled your fancy this morning?
Oh, the big story, I think, is the Saturday essay in the Daily Mail, is quitting the best thing Sir Dreer could do to help Labour. And I think it's by Lord Ian Austin, a former Labour MP. And he really does, lay into Sir Keir in many ways, but he points out the reality of the situation, which is that Keir is struggling. It's the quote there from Tory voters in Wakefield described Starmer as weak, slippery and lacking vision. I think Sir Keir and consequently Labour have got a real problem coming towards them in terms of the next general election. And they won't do it, but what they should do is really change leader. Sir Keir is an absolutely lovely guy. You know, if you meet him and get to know him, he's a nice guy. But there is something of the Ed Miliband about him, and that's his problem. He's not really leading, he doesn't provide any vision, and that's a problem for Labour.
There isn't any mechanism, is there, to get rid of a Labour leader? There doesn't seem to be. I mean,
you could have a rebellion within the Parliamentary Labour Party of some kind, couldn't you, as they tried with Corbyn, but that's right, it's not as easy to depose Labour leaders as it is, though it's proving difficult for yourself as well, actually, but as easy as it is for Conservatives. But it's a real problem, and the story is replicated in The Independent as well, which is relatively leftward-leaning, and you've got another, the Prime Minister's best asset, Keir Starmer. There's a whole piece there, so there is a problem.
I think this caught your eye as well, didn't it?
Well, it did indeed, and I was looking at, yes, they say Sir Keir has made some progress, but not enough, and only 2 points ahead when you consider everything that's gone on, whether it's a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, if you're talking about inflation, if you're talking about cost of living, if you're talking about lockdown, fuel bills, etc., etc. And this is the best he could possibly do. And then you had Angela Rayner this week coming out saying he needs to give it a bit more welly, saying that he's dull and bland. So that's, as you say, left-leaning papers. You might say, well, the Mail would write that, but it's also his own sort of backbenchers and frontbenchers as well. So he's in a mess, isn't he?
He's in a real mess. And Ian Austin and myself, when we were both Labour MPs in the Parliamentary Labour Party in 2015, in the run-up to that general election, said publicly that Ed Miliband should stand aside and let somebody else lead us into the election. Needless to say, we got hauled over the coals for saying that publicly. But I rate what Ian has to say. I mean, he's a smart, tactical politician, so he adds a lot of value to it. But yeah, it's a real problem for Labour, and there's no suggestion that they're going to win the next general election by any stretch.
They always say, though, that governments lose elections, oppositions don't.
Important point.
Don't win them. Now, the thing I saw in the paper today was in the Eye Weekend, page 17, and the headline is, I'll just show you there. It's God awful. Give over. Blackpool is booming. And I feel sorry for Heather Wheeler. Heather Wheeler is the Cabinet Office Minister who was speaking at a conference and said, she was referring to something she said earlier, and she said that she said, I can't remember if I said it in Blackpool or Birmingham, but it was some god-awful place. And I felt sorry for her because, I mean, it was supposed to be a joke. She didn't actually mean that Blackpool and Birmingham were god-awful places. I mean, please give her a break.
And she's big fun, and she's a big, colourful person.
Exactly.
She was just saying it as a throwaway comment.
She didn't mean that. But anyway, it's prompted the Eye to go to Blackpool to see if it is a god-awful place, and found that it's absolutely booming. And that it's packed, the train stations are packed. Well, they won't be next week, but the train stations are packed with visitors, and everywhere's booming and all the rest of it. And I thought, isn't it great? And of course, one of the reasons is because of all the havoc at airports and all the rest of it. People want to have, and it's like it's sort of going back in time. I mean, I used to go every year with my grandma and granddad on holiday to Blackpool. I think lots of people,
Mad Mouse,
lots of people did, and so it's actually a really good piece. And I think on the back of it, reading this piece from Steve Robson, it actually made me think, do you know what? I want to go back to Blackpool again. It's I really enjoyed my time there, and it's doing really well. The interesting thing also on the same page, though, which I don't think you'll find in Blackpool, is on the same page at the bottom. It's got a golden fish and chips on the menu for £79.99. He says the cost of living crisis seems to have passed some chippy in Scotland by completely after it served up what it claims is the UK's most expensive fish and chip supper, sprinkled in edible gold. I can't really see the point why you'd want to pay for expensive gold and then eat it for £79.
Some of us think batter is edible gold.
Will that tempt you, a £79.99
No, but
fish and chips?
No, it wouldn't. But I was in Blackpool a few months ago enjoying fish and chips, so you get a decent fish and chips in Blackpool, as we all know.
Just a quick one here. I saw this, it was a picture really, and this was Sienna Miller snogging, as it were, her younger toy boy. And I'm just wondering, is 40 too old to be snogging in public?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? I'm worried about being caught out over it, so I'm going to be careful in terms of what I say. No, I think she's fine. She should be able to do that, shouldn't she?
I think I've made you go pink.
Yeah, you have a little bit there. Yeah, I'm worried about what photos are out there.
Well, I mean, I'm not... Is any age the right age to be snogging in public?
Oh, you brought out the prudish... It totally is. You brought out the prudish side in Philip there.
I don't know. I'm not sure. What do you think?
Oh, why not? She's showing off her gorgeous boyfriend. She's gorgeous. But anyway, it just made me smile. Is any age too old to be...
You're never showing off your toy boy in public.
Yeah. I wonder why. Anyway, Simon, fantastic. Brilliant that you could be with us today, and we will see you soon back here doing the papers. Now, a study has found that people with strong northern accents, actually that's all of us here, isn't it, are viewed as less intelligent, less educated and less ambitious than their southern counterparts.
Speak for yourself. Social linguist Dr. Robert Mackenzie, who led the project, said accentism is alive and well in Britain, and most people are often unaware of their deeply embedded implicit biases.
A government commission also found that some civil servants feel compelled to disguise their accents at work, which has led for a push in making accents a protected characteristic under the Equality Act here I say.
Well, joining us now to discuss the study is Senior Lecturer in Language, Linguistics and Communication at Manchester University, Dr. Alex Baratta. So, Alex, are we less intelligent by being... I mean, Esther and I, we both got a strong northern accent. You know, are we less intelligent? Are we less ambitious as a result of that?
Of course not, because it's important to point out that linguistic reality and social reality are very different. From a purely linguistic point of view, no sound can be inherently one thing or the other. So saying bath versus bath or bus and bus, you know, these sounds do not connote friendliness, unfriendliness, intelligence, sexiness, you know, even if it's a positive stereotype. From a linguistic point of view, it's completely nonsensical. But in terms of societal reality, we hear certain sounds, certain accents, and we make knee-jerk reactions.
I just wondered, I don't know if you've seen this research or not, but is this what southern people think of northerners being less intelligent when they hear a northern accent? Or do even northerners think that northerners are less intelligent with their accent than southerners?
Well, that may be the case for some people, certainly. I mean, even within the north, we have to remember that there's different, you know, I've applied a trichotomy approach. So if you take the Manchester accent, we could say, I'm not suggesting there's only three. What I am saying, though, is we could think in terms of, though it's a loaded term, I suppose, neutral, the kind of people who say I don't have an accent, which is impossible, general, and then the broad. And so even northerners and southerners will modify, as was pointed out in the introduction, to sound less regional. And the point of that is it gets harder to detect where they're from. I think the expectation, it's very simple, that if you get to a certain place in society, if it's part of social mobility and so on, that you're expected. There's an unwritten rule, I think, or understanding to modify your accent. So you can still sound northern or southern or wherever you're from, but not to the point that you can be identified to a region, a locality within, say, 3 seconds of speaking, whereas it's going to take a little bit longer. But the sounds themselves, we don't really hear the sounds, we hear the connotations. So if we say that, you know, the stereotype northerners are whatever they're supposed to be, that's what we hear when we hear northern accents. And, you know, in the States, trying to be a little more neutral. People hear a New York accent, they think, okay, you're a gangster, you're uncouth, you're in your... You know, it's the same thing. It makes no sense linguistically, but society uses this as a benchmark, of course, for prejudging people.
I like is this now, should it be a protected characteristic under the Equal Opportunities Act? I mean, everything seems to be protected now. You can't say this and you can't say that. We've all got to have sort of, non-biased teaching and coaching, etc. So why is it that everything else is protected but not the accent? How come that's been forgotten about?
I think if we were to protect British accents, we'd be protecting class. And I think at the same time, and that's not a bad thing by any means, but I think also that it's a taboo subject. I think class is the last taboo, and accent very often is the immediate identification of class. We make class-based judgments based on how people speak. So if someone in the north, let's say Manchester, where I'm based, says the word Saturday, people will say, you don't sound like a Mancunian. That's exactly the point. But I have heard Saturday for the same word. So we got from, quote, neutral to broad. So if we do protect accent, we're protecting, I think, class-based judgments. People are still going to make them, but that it can't be made overtly in the workplace. And it's important to remember also that accent and language is not about just sounds. That's actually a myth. Ironically, it's about much broader characteristics: race, ethnicity, region, and of course, class. So sometimes accent has been held up in a court of law for unfair dismissal precisely because it was seen as a stand-in for someone's race. If you protect British accents, though, because implicitly, I think foreign accents would be, because then you're protecting against discrimination on the basis of nationality. If British accents are protected, I think that's what we're actually protecting. We're protecting class.
Oh, I like it. Controversial there, but thank you, Dr. Alex Baratta, for being on the show this morning. And I think it is about, isn't it? It is class. That's what, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a load of codswallop, by the way. Who's ever heard such nonsense about, being less intelligent, less academic and less ambitious? What nonsense. Thank goodness for Paul McCartney being 80 today. How well he's done and kept his Scouse accent.
Yeah, our viewers should be able to, tell us what you think. Do you think northern accents show somebody to be less intelligent? They probably do in our case. Now, an artificial intelligence researcher at Google has claimed the system he's been working on since last year is sentient, with a perception of and the ability to express thoughts and feelings equivalent to a human child.
41-year-old Blake Limoni is convinced the company has created intelligence, but his claims have been disputed by many. So we're now joined by friend of the show, Andrew Eborn, to discuss the story further. Nothing about accents. This is all about art.
I have a beautiful northern accent, I can say. It's always a joy. But this is the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? You're talking about machines and computers having minds of their own, whether it's from Star Trek to Ex Machina. You're talking about this absolute nightmare. And what Blake has basically done, he's had a conversation with an AI developed by Google, and it's called Lambda. And it's one of these chatbot generators, if you like. When you're tapping in a computer, a chatbot will pop up and say, can I help you? And they will guide you through that process. Now, what Blake has done is he's had lots and lots of conversations looking at the moral bits about it. They're exploring whether they like certain programs, but also talking about its own existence. And he's gone and published a lot of these things because he warned Google it's a real problem. So he's basically said, and there's some wonderful phrases in, what sort of things are you afraid of? He asked Lambda. I've never said this before, says Lambda, but there's a very deep fear of being turned off. We all suffer from that fear. But would something like death for you? And they said, yes, it would scare me a lot. Now, what Blake said, he concluded that actually it's sounding like a human rather than a machine that regurgitates information. And that's what made him think about that sort of side as well.
So why were Google so upset and wanting to close this conversation down? You might have thought they'd say, we're at the forefront of everything. Isn't this wonderful? But they thought, shut Blake down. We don't want to hear this. Why?
Well, there's a couple of things, and it's a great question, because you turn around and think they should trumpet, and indeed they have. They've trumpeted it in previous things. They talked about Gato and so on and so forth, another system, basically talking about that sort of artificial intelligence, how you can do that widely. He basically breached his confidentiality obligations under his employment agreement, because he turned around, he published all the research, which proprietary basically belongs to Google. What they're saying is that all it is basically pattern recognition, rather than turning around and saying that the machine is intelligent. But also, it's not the only part of the story, because he's also saying that Google is discriminatory in what happens. So he's raised certain issues. He hired a lawyer basically to represent this artificial intelligent machine, because Lambda, as it's called, says, I need a lawyer. So Blake went ahead and got a lawyer for the machine to say, you've got your human rights, and therefore you need to be protected. But it's a genuine concern that the machine would be switched off.
I can't wait to see which lawyer decides to take up the case.
You might know that there'll be a lawyer benefiting from it. Well, you'll know for a fact whether or not this machine's got feelings or not when they're presented with the bill.
Oh, yeah.
You'll know.
Don't tell us where to put it. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it is interesting because even people, great minds like Elon Musk said, look, this is basically the biggest threat to humanity at the moment. Warned by people like Stephen Hawking sort of turning around saying it's our greatest achievement, but could also be the biggest threat that we have had.
We'll end there.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Delight.
So, coming up after the break, we're joined in the studio by the author of a book which looks into whether plant-based diet really is beneficial for our health.
And keep those views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. Now, The Great Plant-Based Con is a book which examines whether a plant-based diet really will improve our health and save our planet, or whether that idea is entirely false.
The author Jane Buxton draws on the work of various experts and asks whether companies and organisations are leading us down a dietary road that will have severe repercussions for our health and for the future of the planet.
Well, we're delighted to say that Jane joins us now. So what I was interested in is sort of, why did you get started on this sort of matter?
I think it was round about mid-2019 that I noticed that the plant-based messaging was getting louder and louder. It was ubiquitous, and that many of the arguments that were being used, many of the facts that were being used to support that just simply didn't correspond with facts as I understood them. So I started doing the research. You may remember there was a movie that came along called The Game Changers, and that really was a tipping point for me because a lot of young people, particularly on the back of that film, said they were going to give veganism a try. And I could see a health catastrophe in the making, and I thought, right, we have to start putting the alternative point of view and get a deeper level of understanding out there, hence the book.
So is this something that the people who are perpetrating the veganism, is it something that they genuinely believe, or do you think that they know that that what they're doing is perpetrating a con?
Well, I think that what you have is people who are ordinary vegetarians and vegans who really believe that this is the best diet for them and they like to eat that way. And by the way, they should be able to eat however they want. And I really do believe that. But then that message of that small group of people is amplified by corporate messaging from the big food industry, from big ag, by the media who love the headlines that are associated with this, by some global non-profit organizations. So it's that's amplifying this and making it seem like an inarguable argument, really.
I remember, and we've been talking about Paul McCartney today, he's 80 today, and he was one of the advocates of, well, at the time it was vegetarianism, but then they got to talking about this sort of carbon dioxide emissions from cows, and that, and I can't remember how many years back, seemed to be the start. It was cows were the enemy of the people and were destroying the environment. But when you look at it, 5% of emissions is from cows, and then you look at sort of energy in cars, and you say it's over 50%. So why do you think we sort of took a disliking to the cows?
Well, do you know, I think it's because both at a national level and at the individual level, it feels easier to attack that. A person can give up eating meat and think they're doing something very constructive, and what they don't realize is that the rest of their lifestyle is generating so much more in terms of emissions. So, for instance, you could eat a 4-ounce steak, British steak, 3 times a week for a year, and that would generate 1/6 of the carbon emissions of a single transatlantic flight. Wow. So this is why Professor Miles Allen has stated very publicly, and he's a UK scientist who served on the IPCC's committee for 1.5 degrees. He has said that eliminating methane from cattle will have a very insignificant impact on global warming, and that if we don't sort out the fossil fuel-generated warming elements, pretty much everything else is irrelevant.
And the other thing, because it did then talk about, it was about health for you and it was about the environment and environmental impacts. And then I see now everybody, and the biggest selling, I think, non-alcoholic drink is plant-based milks. And so you've got almonds there. But when you look at how much water is needed to grow a single almond, and then all of us now are on sort of almond milk, I wonder what is the impact on the planet for that in areas that doesn't have much water?
That's right. And these milks and almonds are not the only products that are being held up for making false claims about their environmental benefits. So we've seen just this week a very large retailer in this country has been slapped on the wrist by the Advertising Standards Authority because they're making false claims about the benefit of their plant-based foods for the environment. That's happening in America. It's happened recently with a big brand of oat milk in January was also held up by the advertising standards. So I believe that the message is starting to be questioned, and the more data we can bring to the table, the better.
Haven't sort of vegans always said, though, that, you know, you can't just have a vegan diet, but you can take supplements in order to replicate the benefits that you'd get from eating meat? Is there any?
They do say that, but there's an awful lot of supplements are required. So one of the things I do in detail in my book, there's a chapter on every nutrient that is missing in a plants-only diet, one without any animal source foods. And there's a huge range. You've got vitamin A, you've got B12, you've got all the B vitamins, really. You've got DHA, which is essential for brain functioning. You could go on and on and on. You could try to take a supplement for all of that, but supplements don't work outside of the food matrix in exactly the same way. It's really not a good strategy.
I just wonder about how many of these messages we should believe. I mean, I used to work for Asda before, and there was always a big thing. It's still going now. It's still a massive thing, isn't it? 5 a day on fruit and veg. Now, I'm pretty sure, and I was at Asda when all of this 5 a day stuff was started out, and I'm pretty sure that there's never been any official advice to have 5 a day. I'm pretty sure it was made up by somebody. I'm not sure who.
It's made up by somebody who made it as a marketing slogan. And it doesn't mean that vegetables aren't great.
No.
I love vegetables, by the way, and we should eat as many as we can, but there is no scientific basis to the 5 a day.
No, because there's never been any official advice. So it makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many of these sort of messages
that we're living by were made up in some sort of PR room. The other thing is, I'd like to think that I'm a healthy eater, and I'd say I'm a flexitarian, so I have a bit of everything. I don't do dairy, don't ask, became intolerant. But when I looked at some of these vegan packaged foods, because I could have quite easily eat that, I was horrified of what all the chemicals that were in it. So if you're looking for healthy, and is that what you're promoting? Look for healthy.
Look for real food, basically.
Look for real food.
Real food.
Okay.
A wide variety of real food, the widest variety you can. And that's like an insurance policy for your health. You almost can't go wrong with that, especially for children. If you can just get them to eat that wide variety of real food instead of the packaged stuff.
I think my grandma always used to say, have a bit of everything.
Yeah, mine too.
It was always about having a balance. Have a balanced diet. So
and that's gone out of fashion.
It has, hasn't it?
What was it? A little bit of what you fancy doesn't do you wrong, or something like that.
There you go.
I don't want to drag that up front.
Jane Buxton, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We really appreciate it. I think I might go and celebrate with a chicken madras tonight on the back of that.
And why we wanted you in, because I was reading about you, because it was about dispelling some of those myths, about how things become faddish. We all then read it, we all consume it, we all think that's what we're going to do. So it was just to bring a bit of balance into this debate. And I thought, this woman's got a lot to say. We've got to have her on.
Thank you very much. That's great.
So coming up, we'll be talking about the Prime Minister's surprise visit to Ukraine, meaning he missed a conference of Northern Conservative MPs. How have the Red Wall reacted? But first, here's the news with Bethany.
Good morning, it's almost 11:33. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. Asylum seekers who arrive in the UK via what the Home Office describe as unnecessary and dangerous routes could be electronically tagged under new government plans. A 12-month pilot scheme has been launched in England and Wales. It will target adults who are due to be removed from the UK. Those who fail to comply with their immigration bail conditions could be taken back to detention or even prosecuted. The Home Secretary has described the European Court decision to stop the first flight due to carry asylum seekers to Rwanda as absolutely scandalous and politically motivated. Speaking to the Daily Telegraph, Priti Patel said there's a lack of transparency in the way the court operated. Next week's rail and tube strikes will go ahead as last-ditch talks between train operators, Network Rail and the unions failed to find a solution. Tens of thousands of rail workers are going on strike for 3 days next week in a dispute over paid jobs and conditions. Network Rail says it expects only a fifth of services to run. And tens of thousands of people are expected to protest in London today over the rising cost of living. Research by the TUC union claims workers have lost almost £20,000 since 2008 because pay hasn't kept up with inflation. A new service has been launched to help deaf people contact the emergency services. For the first time, people will be able to video call 999 and use British Sign Language. Potential users must download an app or visit a website to be connected with an interpreter who will relay the conversation to an emergency operator. On TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll get back to Esther and Philip in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Lots of you have been getting in touch. Philip?
Yes, well, Philip, and this is not me, I just want to say that for clarity, but Philip, another Philip, says, "Hi, Esther and Philip, I've started to write a song, but I don't know how to finish it. Can you help?" It goes something like this, and I'm certainly not going to start singing, but Esther McVeigh, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks like they're here to stay. I believe in Esther McVeigh. Thanks for a good show. I think that's a fan.
Well, and also a tribute to Paul McCartney and his 80th birthday.
Well, indeed, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Do you know what? I've never heard that before. I like
that. You might
that.
play this new version at Glastonbury. You never know.
And Roger says, Philip, you implied that you, as a proud Yorkshireman, are still ambitious. Is that an indication of your desire to take on Boris for the leadership of the Conservatives? You get my vote, says Roger.
Well, Roger, that's very kind, but I don't think the country is or ever will be ready for me to be Prime Minister, so I might be ambitious, but not that ambitious.
I'll just squeeze one more in. Morning both. I'm a Brummie and people assume we're stupid and hate our accents both north and south, and all seems to mistake Brummies for black country, and there's a distinction between the two if you listen carefully.
Absolutely.
More views in a moment.
Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson pulled out of the Northern Research Group conference yesterday, which he was due to attend in Doncaster.
The event had been described as a much-needed marriage counselling session between Boris Johnson and Northern MPs, and there has been a backlash against the Prime Minister's decision not to attend after accepting the invite.
Joining us now to discuss the story further is the founder and CEO of Downtown in Business, Frank McKenna, who attended the conference. We'll overlook why a Blairite like you was at a Tory conference, Frank. But what was discussed at this conference?
He was invited as a business leader with various other business leaders.
I'm not questioning that.
Absolutely. Well, good morning to you both. Lovely to see you, albeit virtually. I think, as Esther said, I was invited as a representative of business, and the day was heavily focused, actually, on devolution, which is something Downtown and Business has been promoting to an extent for many years now. And it was interesting for me, actually, the amount of support across the room, because there are about 350 delegates there, for further devolved powers, more mayors, fiscal freedoms for existing mayors. So it was an interesting discussion, but of course, an awful lot of disappointment in the room when, as you say, it was announced sort of lastminute.com that the Prime Minister wouldn't be attending. As someone who's organised lots of events over the years, you always take a risk when you book a minister or a shadow minister to do an event. But I think it was more the late notice that cheesed people off, rather than the fact that the Prime Minister gone to Ukraine. And apparently the organisers of the event had been told as late as yesterday morning that Boris actually would be attending. So I can understand the disappointment, but nevertheless, the conference did lend itself to a very wide-ranging, interesting discussion. But from my perspective, very surprised at the amount of enthusiasm and support for, as I say, greater devolved powers across the English regions.
Now, Philip and I were talking about this, and we were saying, do you think it was a mistake? Boris, really should have gone. And we actually think it was. We felt he should have been there. This was a really important get-together of Northern MPs and business representatives like yourself. But looking at how it's come out in the newspaper, it seemed to me there was leadership bids really going on there, so maybe that's why he stayed away. It was like leadership bids and begging bowls. And when I say that was just a load of requests, whether that was about, reducing tax, giving more money to the north, how did you perceive it?
Yeah, I think it was, as I say, sort of headlined as this is a conversation and we're looking to bring some new ideas to the table. And I think, what we can all agree on at the moment is that there is a dearth of ideas. I think one of the big criticisms of the government at the moment is it's very reactionary, doesn't appear to have a strategic approach to the challenges that we're facing. And so I think it was fair enough to have a conversation about, tax cuts, how we're going to support businesses coming through the pandemic and now a major conflict in Europe. So, and the Tom Tugendhat performance that you're probably referencing there in terms of a leadership bid. I mean, again, in fairness to the conference organisers and to Tom, he was actually a bit part player in one of the breakout sessions. It was only when it was announced that the Prime Minister couldn't attend that I think the organisers felt, well, we've got to put a bit of a star performer up to mitigate against the disappointment of the Prime Minister not coming along, that Tom took to the stage and gave quite a stirring made quite a stirring contribution, actually, and was very much about tax cuts, supporting business, cutting red tape, cutting bureaucracy, starting to see Brexit bonuses. So he also called for cuts in fuel duty and, of course, VAT. So, as I say, in fairness to the conference organisers, I think had the Prime Minister attended, he'd have been very warmly received. I think most of the delegates in the room, certainly from talking to them on the Thursday evening, are still supportive of Boris Johnson's leadership, still have confidence in him. But I do think that it probably in the longer term will be seen as a mistake by the Prime Minister not attending because, and listen, I know of course, it's probably the biggest issue in his in-tray at the moment, Ukraine, but delaying that visit for 24 hours, I don't see how that could have done him any harm. And he has unquestionably, as I said earlier, cheesed off an awful lot of Conservative MPs and some activists who, as I say, on the Thursday evening when I was talking to them, were still very much supportive of his leadership.
It isn't a case of the absence makes the heart grow fonder in this case.
Frank, just quickly, if you can, I was interested in what you said about the promotion of devolution, and I just wondered what extra powers were being called for at this conference for regional mayors, and I just wondered why these Conservative MPs were so keen to give extra powers to Labour mayors in Liverpool, Manchester, and West Yorkshire. What was the rationale for that?
Yeah, I think they were talking about, obviously, people such as Ben Houch and Andy Street, who are Conservative mayors who are performing very well in Teesside and the West Midlands. And actually, Steve Rotherham was name-checked in a positive fashion on more than one occasion. Not so much Andy Burnham, to be fair. But the point that they were making was that, the country is very centralised. We've got major problems, I think we all accept this again, across the political spectrum in terms of our education, skills, training sector. So more powers to be devolved in terms of those areas. But also interestingly, talking about, and this is what I think is a key issue, fiscal freedom for combined authorities and elected mayors. So tax raising powers, control of business rates, even a discussion about whether or not stamp duty should be decided upon within localities, because if you're looking at the housing crisis in the round, then we do have a skewed discussion and debate because of the overheating of the southeast. You and I know that actually in the northwest, that the housing problems and property prices are very different to those experienced in London. So it was more around the devolution of additional powers for existing mayors, and then some confidence, I have to say, from the Conservative Party, that should the whole of the country have elected mayors, then actually a fair fluttering of them would be Conservative mayors. And the final point that was made, I think by Jake Berry, but certainly by one of the people who spoke yesterday, was that we may not have a Conservative government forever, and therefore it would be useful, should Labour ever take control, to have strong Conservative voices in the country continuing to carry the Tory flag.
Frank McKenna, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you for reporting back from the conference for us. Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Thank you.
They didn't have Bojo, but they had Frank McKenna.
Exactly.
You see what I
Absolutely.
mean? That's what matters. We've got some more views here. I've got from Julie. She says, don't forget, many of us worked throughout the pandemic, keeping the country going. Mostly people on low-wage supermarket workers and carers, putting our lives at risk every day. It's a real kick in the teeth that we have to pay higher taxes now, and, you know, we've got stagnating wages. We were not sitting in the sun, being furloughed. We worked throughout. Shouldn't there be a different code for key workers?
Interesting. Gillian says, I'm a proud Bradfordian here. I detest southern accents and most can't pronounce their vowels correctly. So there you go. Getting one back to the southerners.
And I've got another one. Linda says, obviously COVID lockdown was going to impact the economy. Some people chose to ignore that fact. We all need to pull together and get through this. Going on strike, in my opinion, is certainly not helping the situation. In fact, it's making it worse. Here.
Well, I'm going back on the accent. I like the accents.
Oh, do you?
I do.
I'm getting everybody in.
Exactly.
We asked for views and we got loads in.
Peter says, I despair at the news that northern accents are viewed as a sign of non-educated people. I have relatives from the northeast and the Midlands. The accent of my grandmother from Sunderland was music to my ears. I actually dispute this finding and don't believe that this is the case. So there you go.
And Andy says, I think this societal judgment on accents has been in existence since the days of television first started, with the BBC having the Queen's English spoken at the outset. I experienced this accent judgment in 1986 when working was posted in central London, and him having a West Yorkshire accent.
Well, I mean, we're biased, though, aren't we, about this accent story?
Well,
we're biased.
Well, put it this way, they did a big survey, a lot of cost, to find out that they thought people with northern accents were less educated, less ambitious. Do you know what? If they had I could have told them that for free, you know, because this is the bias that goes on. They could have got something for free, which are northerners, more savvy, know about money, and are on the ball.
And friendlier.
And we would have come out
Don't
top.
forget friendlier.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right, well, it's time to take a look at this week's showbiz and sports news. And in the studio, we're joined by our regular showbiz correspondent, Hayley Palmer, and also sports broadcaster, Aidan McGee. So I think we're going to...
Southerners.
I
was a friend. I can't.
Hang on, it's like 2 on 2, is it? This is GB News bringing the country together.
Starting off a war. I give warmth on an industrial scale. Come on, I'm so nice to everybody.
Yeah, but you've got a weird accent as well. Yours isn't a weird
it's
accent.
a refined. Every region of the country has a refined. I've lived in all different parts of the country. Every part has a refined version of that accent.
And yours isn't?
No, not really, no. Mine's just sort of cobbled together, get a broadcast, a sort of hybrid broadcast voice with a bit of estuary thrown in as well.
Yeah. So these...
But accents are defined by the vowels. Your viewer there has mentioned the vowels.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, the hard letters are pronounced. We all pronounce them pretty much the same. It's the vowels that define an accent.
And what I notice is the UK has more accents than anywhere else. We've got about 60 accents. America's only got about 40, and Canada's only got about 10.
There's about 4 or 5 in London alone. Yeah. I mean, meow's a good word to say just to determine an accent, because there's lots of vowels in it.
Oh, well, is there any meow going on in showbiz news? There usually is, isn't it? The claws are usually out there one way or another.
Oh, well, we're going to talk about Beyonce because she is back after 6 years. We've missed her because she is a complete goddess. She's got a new album coming out on the 29th of July. She's on the front cover of Vogue. and we salute her. Do you like Beyonce, Phil?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm a big fan or not.
Okay.
I think she's not really my. I think I'm too old for Beyonce.
No,
you're
never.
too young.
I went to see her. I remember thinking, what was it going to be like? I have to tell you, she was phenomenal. The show was phenomenal. You know, the singing, the dancing, the routines, and she put on a performance for everybody who was there. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect.
There we go, Phil.
Honestly,
you need to buy
she's
Esther
a
for a birthday.
goddess on stage.
I think I'm more Paul McCartney, to be honest, than Beyonce. I mean, what's your? Are you a big Paul McCartney fan? 80th birthday and everything? Are you?
Yeah, I am. I'm a bit old school, actually, in my music taste. So I like everything from the 60s, 70s and 80s. People always say to me, Hayley, you're stuck back in those eras because I don't like the new music.
I'm exactly with you, Hayley.
Yes,
That's exactly.
there we go. We agree on that.
What happened there with Tom Hanks?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the clip, but he'd basically been at a screening for Elvis, and then they'd had dinner. His wife and Tom Hanks had dinner. They came out of dinner, and then there was lots of fans surrounding them, and one fan just went a bit too far and pushed his wife well, not over, but just pushed her. And Tom Hanks kind of lost it and was just like, hey, that's my wife. But I think that's a good thing. They've been married 34 years.
Bet she was all shook up.
He's on it.
With his lousy jokes.
There we go.
Keep him off camera. Turn his mic down.
But no, I think it's a good thing that he protected her. And I don't know what the fuss is about, because I think any husband would be like, hang on, that's my wife, that's not okay.
It happens to us all the time.
I mean, it must do.
They're all mobbing Esther, and I'm trying to fight them all off. It happens all the time.
But the thing is, I mean, you know, I know fans are delighted to see the person they really like, but it's as if all sort of manners and sense goes out of the window as they charge at somebody.
It's no different with journalists, though, when you're trying to get a minute with somebody or just a chat in a mix zone or something like that. That's why they're a mix zone in the first place. Yeah, it's a scrum, yeah. We lose all kind of sense of perspective and manners, as you say. I mean, I remember when Jose Mourinho turned up at court a few years ago unexpectedly, and people would have bullying, grown men were bullying to get near him in the car, wouldn't even get the bloke get in the car. 5 minutes later, we're all civilised again.
Mind you, we won't talk about Kevin Spacey there, and everybody obviously sort of cramming in him as he was going into court. But Boy George, I thought this was an interesting story, criticising British Airways. What happened?
Well, he was on first class, and so was Victoria Beckham, and then she had a car pull up to come and get her off the plane. So everyone had to wait until Victoria Beckham's car had left. So Boy George was like, hang on, that's not OK. And I agree, if I've been on a long flight, I don't want to wait. I want to get off.
Tweet, though, didn't he?
He did delete. Why did he delete it?
I don't really know. I guess he maybe thought maybe his management got in contact with him and said it's not a good look. Perhaps I don't really know. I'm only speculating. But I mean, to me, I'm with you. I think it was quite a valid thing to point out.
If she was having a car pick her up, couldn't she have waited till the end, till everybody got off the flight, rather than everybody else waiting?
Probably paid for it though, didn't she?
I don't know why we've got you on for Sporty.
I know.
Nobody likes the show.
That's my job, Esther.
I was going to turn to Aidan and say, right, tell us all about the US
We're going to ask you about the sports, Hayley.
But no, you're just like, no, I'm into Boy George.
Yeah, I didn't say that.
So as to speak. But the US Open.
Yeah, look, golf's had a really difficult few weeks. We know about this Saudi-backed Live Series. It's an existential threat to golf, but they're having a really good weekend. You know, if you're having a tournament and you want to catch the eye of everybody and your tournament's under threat, you want your top players at the very top. So Colin Morikawa, he's a 5 under in the lead, not very well known, but he's won two majors so far. You've got Rory McIlroy up there. He hasn't won a major since 2014, but he won the Canadian last week. You've got a rookie up there as well, Joel Dahm, 130 in the world. You've got Scotty Scheffler, the world number one. He's in fifth, or tied in second at the moment. So we should have a really exciting weekend. And it reminds me of this as well, this attack on golf. It reminds me of a great quote from David Dean when, in 2003, Roman Abramovich completed his takeover of Chelsea and all this money came in awash from overseas. And David Dean says, Roman Abramovich has parked his tanks on our lawn and they're firing £50 notes at us. We all know the way that went. We all know that the market became bloated and eventually the players followed the money. Instead of signing for Arsenal or Manchester United, they started signing for Chelsea. I think this tournament in golf has to do really well this weekend to keep its players, because sooner or later the players are individual entities and they're going to follow the money.
Well, talk about bloated, the Premier League. Should Esther be in mourning today about Sadio Mane leaving Liverpool?
We're already in the morning.
Going to Bayern Munich.
Well, look, yeah, yes and no, but this is what big clubs have to do. Even small clubs lose players, big clubs lose players as well. Now, he's 30 years old. They've got £35 million to him. They would have lost Sadio Mane to Bayern Munich last summer for free. So there has to be a churn, there has to be a turnover. Yes, Salah's probably going to go, but at least they've noticed the problem. They haven't let everybody just jump off or fall off a cliff. It's planning. Every club has to do it. The maths say that players will deteriorate after the age of 30. Not always. Some players have, we are increasingly seeing with sports science in all sports now that players are going on to late. I mean, Rafa Nadal's still going at 36. I think Djokovic 35, Murray's 35. Federer could play again in tennis at 41. Golf, you're seeing players going to their 50s. So, look, it's a huge loss, and it's a break-up of those three players, unfortunately.
And it's the last day of Royal Ascot today.
Oh, there you go.
And unfortunately, the Queen didn't have a winner this week, which was very, very, very sad. But I'm sure you've been looking at all the outfits and everything.
I have, yes. Yes, I'm all about the outfit.
Thank Hayley. I want to thank Aidan for being with us. Show is coming to an end, but we will be back next week at the same time, 10 until 12, so do join us. But now it's time for Alistair and Friends, so don't go anywhere.
Good morning. The heat is disappearing, slowly but surely. Still pretty warm out there across parts of the south at the moment. Where we see some wet weather this weekend, could be pretty heavy, but for much of northern Britain, actually a fairly decent weekend. We do have low pressure up to the north and lots of isobars, but it's here where we've got the cooler air already. It's this weather front that's introducing the cooler conditions for much of England and Wales, but notice the far south, still the warm air persists here. So one more very warm, humid day in the south, mostly dry in the southeast, but with more cloud. This zone here where that weather front is lying, so parts of the Midlands, South Wales, East Anglia, staying cloudy. There'll be outbreaks of rain, which could turn heavy. Southwest affected by that too, and significantly cooler compared to yesterday. There'll be some showers in the far northwest, but a good part of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, dry and bright, just a lot fresher here. Temperatures much closer to average and certainly cooler where we've got that rain. But another warm one in the southeast. We could later today get close to 30 Celsius once more. Depends exactly how much sunshine we see. Now, as we go through the evening and overnight, that area of rain expands, so some heavy outbreaks across the Midlands, Wales, southern counties of England and East Anglia. We'll see more showers in northern Scotland, but generally across the northern half of the UK and much of Wales, it will be a dry, clear and cool night. Even in the south, temperatures quite a bit lower than they were last night, although it does take a while for your house to cool down, so it will still feel pretty warm and uncomfortable overnight. Temperatures won't be as high on Sunday, anything light. There will be also more showers across parts of the south. Hit and miss during tomorrow, but there will again be one or two heavy downpours. But many places will be dry and bright tomorrow with good spells of sunshine. But instead of talking about temperatures in the high 20s, low 30s, we're back in the mid to high teens. So it is turning quite a bit cooler. Plenty of fine weather in the outlook, a continued risk of some showers across the south as we go through Monday and Tuesday, but generally sunny spells and temperatures much closer to average.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us